had the War on Terror. Now get ready for the War on Radicals, June 11th, 2024. As 2024 rolls in, a new phenomenon is taking hold, something I've dubbed the War on Radicals. Throughout the 1990s and earlier 2000s, the War on Terror was a well-known government phenomenon. Regulations surrounding travel and speech and the ever-growing dominance of the military-industrial complex became noticeable. From the protesters in London being subject to arrest at the hands of the Blair regime for speaking out against the tragedy that was the Iraq War, to millions of taxpayers' dollars being sent to foreign lands in the US, not to mention the tax-subsidised weapons and defence corporations growing dramatically. In a sense, the War on Terror achieved its end goal, which was and still is the advancement of state expansionism. What we see in the modern day has echoes of what occurred throughout that period. In the EU, politicians speak of dread and horror over parties like the AfD, Action for Deutschland, and other, quote, populist parties. Or in America, where the Biden regime constantly warns us all of the great threat to our democracy posed by MAGA Republicans. All the while, these politicians lobby Parliament or Congress to pass new laws restricting our freedoms and democratic rights in the name of protecting democracy. These people, or rather victims of the entrenched elite, are often described as radical or far-right, which in and of itself is a misnomer, as many of the aforementioned parties have equally right-wing views to left-wing ones. In a sense, they usually sit perfectly in the middle or slightly right of centre. These people, as well as we all know, however, are not far-right. Rather, they embody an old style of politics of old-world Western democracies, one of sensible liberalism and old-world conservatism. They stand for sensible controls on immigration, and in a large part, separation and deregulation of state powers, just as what Western democracies once subscribed to in things such as the Magna Carta and American Constitution. These people are not threats to your freedom or civil rights. Rather, they are a threat to entrenched special interests and elites who propose a radical agenda of state expansionism. We see how these entrenched interests operate by creating a system of managed democracy. Parties can stand and propose policy based on a voting system that is often interfered with and subsidised by people immigrating to these countries in the thousands, and swaying the vote in these special interest groups' favours. Parties can take part, but how well they do is based off of how the globalist elite think of them. People, however, are often blind to this and vote for those very elite, as they have the exceptional narcissistic ability to shout mantras and slogans that sound meaningful and resonate with voters, despite those elites never actually fulfilling those slogans. Not to mention how new language is introduced to children in schools, and the history and foundings of our nations are often taught sloppily or under the guise of horrific colonialism. Meaning years of programming by this establishment has left millions of people without a sense of identity or nation, leaving room for elites to just make up theories of what our nation should be to fit their interests rather than what it actually represents, in order to suit their own vision, and the people with no national identity see this made-up ideal as offering some form of identity and belonging within their nation, and so keep voting for the wolves to lead the sheep. However, the real threat these radicals pose is to the globalist order. They have set up these institutions in order to fulfill their ideology rather than what the electorate desires. And now the holes in their once impenetrable ship are leaking, and the people's will is slowly returning to the institutions, and this terrifies them. We see this reflected in the language of the European Parliament with the term the radical centre. A flagrantly absurd term, and a contradiction to us, but to them it is truly radical. They know they can no longer describe this phenomenon as a far-right movement, as the term far-right now rings empty in the ears of this coming generation, as well as the obvious fact that a lot of these parties espouse sensible policies from either side of the political aisle. They represent sensible moderates from the 80s and 90s, who existed before the full realisation of a globalist corporatocracy and a bloated state. They use the word populist as a negative label, despite populism's definition literally meaning to espouse the popular opinions of the everyday blue-collar worker. The war on radicals has the same goal as the war on terror did, which is to advance the size of the state. They know their systems that were designed to keep them in power are failing, therefore they need to make new laws and more regulations in order to keep power. They are in a desperate attempt to patch the holes on their sinking ship. But there is hope, because if the holes in their supposedly impenetrable bureaucracy do exist, as they have proven they in fact do, then it is only a matter of time before the people's anger and resentment with the state fully spill out and drown the dreaded decaying ship of globalist control and big government. We see this reflected in the radicals' ever-growing support, such as, for example, a growing libertarian movement in the Republic of Ireland as a direct response to the state interfering with the constitution and affecting the rights in which it guarantees to the Irish people, as well as imposing mass immigration on a horrific scale against the will of the Irish working class. If you love your country and your people, now is the time to stand up and speak and seize the power and control from the state and place it back into your country-loving, patriotic and community-representing hands. The only reason the globalist takeover hasn't been as dreadful as it could have been is as a direct result of nations' founding principles and constitutions, as well as their robust and freedom-loving constitutional protections. So I would advise readers, if they have a copy of their nation's constitutions or founding, to read it word for word and come to appreciate and respect its importance, as it's the only thing which so far has guaranteed you safety from the state's monopoly on violence.